Imagine a place where nature has risen from the ruins, where humans dare not set foot, but where life is regaining its strength. In the heart of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, an incredible story unfolds, full of mysteries and wonders. Here, among villages and forests abandoned forever, wild animals reign, bringing back to the world forgotten secrets of survival and flourishing. After the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, the area around the nuclear power plant became a ghost land, devoid of life, inhabitants, and a future. However, just a little over 3 decades later, nature has amazed us with its power to recover and adapt. Are you ready to dive into this mystery of nature, capable of astonishing the imagination? The Chernobyl disaster left behind not only ruined cities, but also a unique ecosystem. The radioactive release affected both flora and fauna. In the first years after the accident, the number of animals in the zone decreased significantly, but over time, nature began to recover. Radiation affects the genetic material of animals, leading to mutations. Most often, these changes manifest as physical deformities and in some cases even as changes in behavior. It was predicted that genetic instability in animal populations living in the contaminated area would persist for many generations. However, on the contrary, they have learned to adapt to such conditions. Nevertheless, it is worth paying attention to the story of Kiev geneticist Vyacheslav Konovalov. He assembled a collection of Chernobyl mutant animals. Part of the exhibits is kept at the Institute of Genetics in the village of Chubinske, Kiev region. But unfortunately, most of the collection no longer exists physically. Vyacheslav said that in the very first year after the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, almost every village saw the birth of mutants. 2-headed piglets and calves, 4-legged geese, cows with 4 horns, and an 8-legged foal. People would burn the monsters that were born, but Konovalov tried to establish connections with rural veterinarians so he could learn about such incidents and preserve the mummified animals as evidence. The scientist would bury the animals in the forest in glass containers filled with formalin, marking the burial site so he could find them later. Giant catfish are fish known for their strength and size. They can reach impressive sizes, and some specimens in Chernobyl are simply shocking in their dimensions. The average size of a catfish in such bodies of water can be about 7 feet, but there are specimens up to 10 feet long and weighing more than 220 pounds. The largest specimens are found in the Pripyat River. This river is an important part of the Chernobyl zone ecosystem. But of course, there are plenty of myths about such giants. Some say these fish can drag entire boats, while others claim that real monsters lurk in the rivers of the Chernobyl zone hunting people. But let's be honest, these stories are mostly fiction. However, one of the guides who leads tours in the Chernobyl zone says that in the cooling pond of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a catfish could easily pull a child underwater. He also says it hunts birds that land on the shore. Currently, 14 species of rare and not so rare bats live in the zone. The brown long-eared bat is a small species of bat known for its large ears, which are twice as long as those of most other members of its genus. These ears play a key role in echolocation, helping the animal navigate in the dark and catch insects such as moths. The long-eared bat prefers wooded areas with dense shrubs where it is easy to find shelter and food. This species is rarely encountered and its population is declining due to habitat loss and climate change. Long-eared bats often build their nests in the hollows of old trees or in abandoned buildings. In Chernobyl, despite the high level of radioactive contamination, long-eared bats continue to exist, which has become an interesting subject for scientists. The cessation of human activity in the exclusion zone has allowed nature to recover, and bats have found new sources of food and shelter here. Despite the threat of radiation, the populations of long-eared bats in Chernobyl remain stable, indicating their ability to adapt to extreme conditions. The Red Forest is one of the most famous places in the Chernobyl zone. When the radiation was released, the intense exposure literally burned the tops of the pine trees. The needles turned a rusty red color, which is how the forest got its name. On the cross-sections of the annual rings, you can see how the radiation affected them. The rings acquired a reddish tint after the accident. Radioactive contamination alters the DNA of plants. Such mutations cause cell division to slow down, so the trees grow slowly and often die while still young. In addition, a high concentration of cesium-137 and strontium-90 is recorded in the wood. This means that the tree literally absorbs radiation from the soil. Besides pines, birch, alder, and aspen also grow in the zone. These species have proven to be more resistant to radiation. Birch trees in particular are spreading rapidly here thanks to their ability to quickly take over newly available space. Research on the trees of Chernobyl helps us understand how radiation affects entire ecosystems, not just individual species. This experience is unique and is still used today when assessing the consequences of nuclear accidents and even space flights. In the early 2000s, a strange video circulated around the world showing a moose running across a railway track. Nothing surprising, you might say? But the moose had no head. The video was filmed by a cameraman from the Zvezda television channel. He was planning to take a panoramic shot of nature, but at that moment a moose ran by, frightening not only the man but the whole world. Later, a legend even arose about the headless moose. Supposedly, this animal is the guardian of the animals in Chernobyl, a kind of Chernobyl spirit. Sometimes people see it and try to catch up, but it always slips away. However, skeptics believe that this is just a myth fueled by Chernobyl's mystical reputation. But in any case, the video looks very realistic. What do you think? In 2016, a group of foreign researchers discovered several eastern tree frogs in the exclusion zone that were not the usual bright green color, but had an unusual black coloration. Scientists suggested the frogs changed color to better adapt to the radiation. Melanin, which colored the frogs dark, is able to reduce the negative effects of radiation because it absorbs and dissipates such radiation. Over the course of 2 years, from 2017 to 2019, scientists conducted research on more than 200 such specimens. After studying them, the scientists concluded that the tree frogs likely underwent a rapid evolutionary process triggered by radiation. In other words, frogs with darker skin tones turned out to be better adapted to radiation than their green counterparts. That is why there are now almost no ordinary green frogs left in Chernobyl. Wild deer, like many other animals, settled in the Chernobyl zone after people abandoned these lands. These graceful animals, once part of the ecosystem, returned to the devastated forests as well as to less contaminated areas. But what happened to them when radiation began to affect everything around? Normal deer have antlers of a certain shape and size. However, animals living in Chernobyl often have abnormal and deformed antlers. In addition, deer, like many other animals in Chernobyl, may suffer from diseases caused by radiation. For example, they experience weakened immune systems, which makes them more vulnerable to infections. Interestingly, despite the effects of radiation, the deer in Chernobyl have managed to adapt to the new conditions. Studies show that they are developing new behavioral strategies to survive in this dangerous environment. For example, they have become more cautious and secretive, avoiding areas with high radiation levels. Scientists say that despite the animals' adaptation, the long-term effects of radiation may not yet be fully understood. Some changes occurring in the deer population, such as reduced lifespan or altered reproductive capacity, may only become apparent after decades. One of the first things scientists observed were health anomalies in wolves. For example, some of them exhibited organ deformities, weakened immune systems, and reproductive problems. But the most interesting aspect is the genetic changes that can be passed on to their offspring. Anomalies manifest in various pathologies, such as skin diseases and even reduced lifespan. However, for most of these animals, radiation is not fatal. It only affects their bodies, creating long-term consequences. The wolves of Chernobyl have also changed their behavior, adapting to the new conditions. With no people in these areas, the wolves have become more confident. They began boldly exploring new territories, forming larger packs, and developing new hunting strategies. But radiation makes them avoid the most contaminated areas, just like the deer. Instead of inhabiting the center of the exclusion zone, they prefer to stay on the periphery, where radiation levels are lower, which increases their chances of survival. The effects of radiation on bears are in many ways similar to the condition of deer and wolves. For example, a weakened immune system. Some have also been found to have abnormalities in their blood cells and organs. Like wolves, bears have also become more confident since there are no people around. They explore new territories, often venture into open areas and actively search for food. Interestingly, bears are beginning to settle in places that were previously occupied by humans, such as abandoned villages or even ruined buildings. This phenomenon raises questions about how much radiation is changing the habits of these animals. Despite all the dangers, the bear population in Chernobyl continues to grow. Scientists know that in recent decades, the number of bears here has increased. This is because in the exclusion zone, where there are no people, it becomes easier for animals to find food and claim their territory. Moreover, in the absence of competition with humans and their activities, bears feel safe. This allows them to strengthen their population and adapt to new conditions. After the Chernobyl disaster, radioactive fallout partially wiped out many insects, animals, and along with them, birds. In the first years, almost no birdsong could be heard, hear only silence and the whistling of the wind among the deserted trees. But, as time passed, nature once again demonstrated its resilience. Already in the 90s, ornithologists began recording the return of the first species. In addition to large species, numerous songbirds are also returning to the zone warblers, thrushes, robins, and flycatchers. Their numbers even exceed those in surrounding areas where humans are actively engaged in agriculture. Research by Ukrainian and Belarusian scientists shows that the impact of radiation on birds does indeed exist. This is manifested in an increased frequency of mutations, reduced lifespan, and poorer offspring survival. But all of this is offset by the absence of people. For many species, the key factor has been the restoration of forests. Abandoned fields are overgrown with shrubs and young trees, which make it easy to build nests. Old villages with half-ruined houses have become new shelters for hundreds of species that cannot find such hiding places in modern agricultural areas. These cautious predators had not been seen here before the disaster. Previously, their main habitat was the Carpathians and the northern forests of Belarus. In the absence of people, the vast forested areas have become an ideal territory for lynxes. The lynx's main diet consists of rodents, roe deer, young deer, and large birds. After deer and wild boar began to actively reproduce in the zone, this became one of the main factors for the successful establishment of the population. Today, it is believed that the lynx population in the Chernobyl zone is not very large, ranging from several dozen to about 100 individuals. But for a species that is declining in Europe due to deforestation and hunting, this is an important refuge. The lynx has become yet another example of how nature fills the void created by humans. Where there were once fields and villages, now wild predators reign, creatures whose presence seemed impossible for decades. In the 1990s, when people left, beavers quickly returned to their old habitats. They began building dams, flooding meadows, and altering river courses. Beavers instinctively blocked the flow of streams to protect themselves from predators. It was their activity that caused many areas to turn into wetlands with new vegetation. These wet biotopes became an ideal home for frogs, insects, fish, and numerous birds. Scientists know that beaver dams trap radioactive particles in the sediment. This means that the water flowing further downstream is gradually purified of radionuclides. In this way, beavers indirectly help reduce the radioactive contamination of bodies of water. Now, beavers have firmly settled in the large rivers of the zone, as well as in small tributaries and canals. Their population has only been growing over the past 30 years. They have become true architects of new ecosystems. This story is a reminder that even the most secretive and cautious species can find a chance to return if nature is given enough time and freedom. Thus, the Chernobyl zone has turned into a unique nature reserve, where nature shows that it can return even to places considered lost forever. That's all for today. Thank you for watching,